Hello, this is Cassie Riddell here. I am the Director of CACFP and Summer Food Programs here at the State Department. This is a quick little video to briefly go over the new changes for the application for FY22. If you've been sent this or received it, you're either working on your application already, or you might have encountered some questions and it's been sent to you, and hopefully we can answer your questions to any of the changes for this year. But if not, we have some live trainings that are happening twice a month right now, the first and third Tuesday of every month. They're starting back up next week. So September 7th is the first one. We paused for a little bit while we were waiting on a new application to come out. So we're getting those started again. So if I'm not able to answer your question fully in this little brief video, please register for one of those trainings and come. Like every year before, to insert the new application, you do have to go here and enter the year and then click add new renewal. And you'll see that I've already done that here, so it's populated. One thing to keep in mind is that I am in a test environment to be able to show you these things. I also am in a test account, and I'm also logged in as myself. So you might see some things that look a little different than what you're used to. Like here, you probably don't normally see that many selections over here on the side. And that's simply because I'm logged in as a State Department user. You will see over here is the training calendar. So the trainings that I referenced earlier, you can go to the training calendar and sign up there. And it's just called the CACFP application training, I believe is the title of it. The first form that we made some significant changes to is this form here. It was previously labeled the application questionnaire, but now it's called the viability, capability, and accountability questionnaire. We've kind of really been strengthening some of the things that we require for new applicants, but we also need to be requiring some of this stuff to be done yearly by all of our renewing institutions. So it has the same 5 questions that you're used to every year. We've added many more. So just for an example, this first question is asking you to explain your procedures that ensure integrity and accountability of all CACFP related expenses. Basically, we want to know, how are you documenting your expenses? How are you recording all those expenses and making sure that they're allowable costs? And how are you ensuring they're supported by documents? These boxes can grow larger. They'll hold several characters, and we want you to be as explicit as possible because we want to be able to see how you're operating, and you tell us here, but then when your consultant comes out to conduct a review, how you're operating should be reflective of what your application says. So everybody's response to these questions might be a little different because you might operate differently. I'm not going to go through and read each one of these questions. I'm just going to pick a few out or highlight some things, but you all really should know the answers to these. And like I said, be very detailed. We want you to explain your current policies and procedures for how you're operating this program. It talks a lot of it. There are a lot of questions about cost and how they were incurred and how you're tracking those, if you're using any specific software. If not, that's fine too. We want to know the people who's responsible for developing your budget and also for comparing it to your actual expenses and making any budget revisions. So many times you folks will fill out your application, your budget will be approved, and then you don't think about it again for a year. But as the year goes on, your budget might need updated because it's just a projection. So keep that in mind, that it's always likely that you might need to come back and revise your budget so that it correctly reflects how you're operating and what you've spent. We also want to know all the responsible personnel that have any type of CACFP responsibility. If you have multiple sites, we need to know who's responsible at each of those sites. And you guys are used to that. We have to make sure all those folks are trained. Who's the person responsible for hiring and training those people when they're hired? And then these next few questions, we want to know you to describe your procedures for how you're complying with meal patterns. What's your procedures for collecting your family and size income applications? You guys know it has to be done annually. For some of you, it might not be applicable, but for the vast majority of our participants on this program, you all have to distribute those income applications each year. So tell us when. What is your general practice for when and how you do that? How are you ensuring that you're maintaining daily records? As you know, you have to maintain them daily. They have to be maintained on site. But what are your procedures to make sure that the number of participants and attendance and daily meal counts are collected as they should be? And then how are you ensuring that your claims are processed accurately and in a timely manner? That's talking about your claim submission in our system. As you know, you have 60 days past the last day of the month to get them submitted. And sometimes people are really close to that 60th day. So we're trying to make sure we're strengthening your procedures for doing those, and let's make sure we're getting them in on time. These questions here, 19, 20, well, these two are talking about where your records are kept. So on your business maintenance page, we do ask you to put in an address, but these two, we want to know specifically in your institution, where can we find your CACFP records and who has access to them? Because unfortunately, if we come out and you, as the sole person, you might be the one responsible for the records, you may not be there. And you don't have to always be there. You've got to have somebody there that does know. So we need to be able to find the person that does know where the records are, and they can access them for us. Because it has happened that there's been extenuating circumstances why an owner couldn't be there and they had the access, the key to the only file cabinet, the only key to the file cabinet where it's housed. And then fortunately that person could become SD or terminated because we can't access it. That's not what we want. We just want to make sure we can access your records. These last two questions are talking about your additional funding other than CACFP funding. So in the event you ever owe money to SDE, what funds are you going to use to pay for that debt? You have to be financially viable enough to operate without CACFP funds, and that's what 22 kind of hones in on. So many times when you guys owe us money for a review, and that's typically the only time you really owe money, up some type of mistake, you need a revision, or something that happens in overclaim in a review. Not uncommon. And generally, we just take it out of future claims. The caveat is the correct response to number 21 is not that you'll pay for it with your claims, because regulations actually says you can't pay for CACFP debt with CACFP funds. The reason we're allowed to take it out of future claims is because that's with the understanding that with that reduction in reimbursement, you have some other supplemental income to subsidize the amount you're not getting. So we need to know what other funds you have that you use to operate without CACFP funds, and that's what 22 restates. It's regulatory that you can operate this program as you're currently operating without CACFP funds. So if you guys have been on any length of time, especially throughout this whole COVID period, we've experienced interruptions in payments. It happens. It's always going to happen. Sometimes our systems fail us. Sometimes USDA, the funding isn't coming from USDA in the time that, in line with the time that we are making payments. Those of you that have been on many years, remember way back in the day, we used to just get paid once a month. And when we went online and things became electronic, we have that convenience of being able to pay every week. And that's not always been the case. And most states don't even do that. But we do have that luxury. But sometimes it just can't happen. So what other funds do you have to be able to operate without them? And then this last little one right here, it's not a question, it's just a checkbox stating you understand that we can't backdate applications. We've had some confusion in the past about your application has to be submitted by this date in order to be eligible for October. And just to simplify, if it's not submitted in October, you will not be eligible for October. We can't backdate to previous months. So just know applications will only be approved beginning with the month in which they are submitted. So this form makes you check that you understand it before you can submit it. This is all the changes and there's several questions on here, but that's all that we've changed on this form. If you need help with answering those questions, you're always welcome to reach out to us in the office or your consultants. But I would also encourage you, we have a CACFP orientation class that will help go over many things that might help you address these questions. The next form we updated a little bit. And like I said, excuse me, sometimes we'll see some weird errors because I'm in a test environment. We've updated this form a little bit to give you a little more definition about what we're looking for. When we ask you guys to report to us your fiscal year information, it's whatever fiscal year you operate on. We operate on October to September, our program does, but you might operate January to December, or if you're a school, it will be July to June. So on this form, we're wanting you to report to us the amount of money you received for your last fiscal year. So it's on the months that you operated. Whenever you close out your books for your fiscal year, that's the 12 months we're after. Same thing for your other federal funds. So we need to know about all your federal funding. Title I, Title IV, Title V, Title 20, DHS, that's your DHS subsidy, is your Title 20. And then we have the 19, which is your Medicaid. Our adult daycares have that, and then any tribal funding. And then if these two things add up to be more than $750,000, you have to submit a date for when you had an audit. It's required, it's regulatory that if you make over that $750,000 in federal funds each year, you have to have an outside audit. It's not the review we conduct, it's a separate organizational independent audit. There's not been any changes to these forms whatsoever. We made some little tweaks on the state agency institution agreement on the meal patterns chart to change out the word serving to ounce equivalents, because as you're aware, we switched over to that this year. We also took out the reference for family daycare homes where there was the 15-minute leeway on the serving times. There is no 15-minute leeway. So for any institutions, just know that whatever time you report on your application for participation as the beginning time is the time you start. If you want to build in some type of leeway to, have flexibility, that's fine. But whatever time you list on there is the time that you start. Whatever time you list as the ending is the time you end. Let's see, the application for participation. We didn't update a whole lot, but as you may know already, if you've attended required training. And like I said, you'll see all this blank because I'm in a test environment. But as you're aware, you go here and you already have meal times listed. We have had to make the change that after your application's been approved, if you need to change or remove any meal times, it will require a form to be submitted. And that's simply because our system is incapable of tracking meal times that are changed or removed. So to be 100% clear and honest, it was an audit finding that was making it look like, okay, say you had an approved supper time. You claimed supper for half the year and then you decided you didn't want to do suppers anymore, so you came and deleted it. Now we've got half a year where we paid you for suppers, but there's no approved supper time. And it's simply because the system is not retaining that history. So we're going to have to kind of go back to an old school way and require a form. So now when you go to change a meal time, move that up a little bit, you'll get this message that just says you have to fill out the meal time change form. You can find it in the resource library, and until we get this form, we won't approve these times. And this application for participation will be unapproved. So it's going to prevent your claim until we get that documentation. And that's all we've really changed on this form. The last form that we made some significant changes to, and which is probably why you're watching this video, is the administrative budget for independent sites. If you're multi-sided, you're used to how this operates. It might look a little bit different, but for our independent single-sided institutions, this is a brand new looking document or form for you. We're still needing the same information. It's just in a little different format. Okay, so you'll see here Part A, just like it was before, even though it's a little bigger and it's formatted differently. Part A is just for your administrative costs. Part B is for your operational costs. And administrative costs are those employees or staff that are conducting, administrative duties like paperwork, the person that's filling out the application here, the person who submits the claims, anyone that's doing any type of administrative duty. It's not the folks that are cooking and serving meals. They go down here. So for some of you, that might just be you. It might just be one person who does all those things, and that's fine. But we need to know that information. So each of these schedules is a hyperlink, and you'll open it up and enter them. And you'll see I've already done some testing here, and there's some entered in the grid. When you open it up and nothing's been entered yet, it'll just be like a red bar that says no one's been added, basically. You'll click on the add item and it opens up this form. And it looks very confusing, but it's pretty easy. I've already entered myself, but I'll do it again. We'll say I'm the director. Now the tricky part here is understanding what you're putting here. So a full-time person will work according to what what we're basing it on here is 2,080 hours a year. That's 40 hours a week times 52 weeks. So this grand total here needs to equal 2,080. And of those 2,080 hours, how many hours does that person spend on non-CACFP duties? And how many hours do they spend on CACFP duties? Just CACFP related things. In the previous budget, we went based on percentages, and this kind of does too, but it's going to be much more specific. So if you're familiar, what we capped out the amount that you could use CACFP funds to pay for your administrative labor was 20%. So if you recall, you'd put in the directors, well, you didn't put in the name, but you had a director, and you put in the salary, and you'd put 80 to the center portion and 20 to the CACFP portion. Well, now we're going to put number of hours. So 20% of 2,080 is 416. So 416 would be your maximum number of hours you would allow on the CACFP duty amount. Just because that's, like I said, that equates to 20% of your time, and that's pretty reasonable. So then this one would be 832 because those two things added together would be your 2,080. Then you would put your salary here. I'm just letting it auto-populate the stuff I had in there already. I misspoke. It's not 832. It's 1664. So 1664 and 416 should equal 2,080. Yes. But say you do other jobs like you do clerical work. The reason I did that was 832. That's 836. 1664 divided by 2 is 832. Sorry, guys. So you might have more than one duty in your non-CACFP hours. So 832. The point of this is we wouldn't allow more than 416 hours over here because that's 20% of that time. Then you go over here, like I said, enter the salary, you enter the taxes. I just auto-populated stuff here, like I said before, and you just click calculate. And it automatically figures up the amount of time that you're going to spend on CACFP and the total allowable amount of time or total allowed amount that you can use CACFP funds to pay for this salary. Okay, to recap, because I kind of made that confusing. Enter the person's name. Remember, these are people that only do paperwork, claims, administrative duties. You're going to report their number of non-CACFP hours on this side, whatever duties they have, and this amount should equal 1664. In column 3 is where you report their number of CACFP hours and 20%, and you can see that here, it does that calculation for us. 416 hours of 2080, which is a full year, is 20%. And that's what we cap you out of. Then it takes the amount that you put in for the salary and taxes and calculates the allowable amount. So the grand total here, this total amount CACFP expense for this employee, that's your total amount that you can count and what you can use our funds to pay for this person's salary. When you're done, you click add and it inserts it. This is the one that we just inserted here. I'm going to back up though, because I want to mention something too. We also do need to list the people who have administrative duties, but they aren't CACFP personnel either, because the way this budget works is you have the entire institution budget. We want to know, what does it cost for your entire institution to operate administratively? Then what's the portion that you're going to use CACFP funds to pay for? This column over here is when we come back and approve it. So this will be zeros until we come back and approve your application. So it is important that we know your entire institution budget. The reason being is, like I said before, you've got to be financially viable. So we need to see, what does it cost for you to run your operation, whatever you are, whether you're an at-risk, a daycare center, a school. We need to know your entire budget. But then we just need to know the portion that it costs for CACFP and the allowable cost that you're projecting it will be to just operate the CACFP. So I say all that to point out that we still need to know about all those other people that have salaries that aren't related to CACFP duties. We would want you to enter, so like if you're a daycare or a school or what have you, you have teachers and other staff that have duties and they may not do anything related to CACFP. We still need to know their salaries. And kind of an easy way to do that, we will allow you guys to just say 12 teachers. Say you have 12 teachers in your institution. And it's a little redundant, but this is just so you can get that amount in your salaries, because it is a cost. You may not use our funds to pay for it, but we need to know what those costs are. So we'll just say they spend all of their time doing 100% administrative non-CACFP hours. Then for those 12 teachers, you're going to put the grand total of all their salaries. So we'll say that's, I don't know, $150,000. Just making stuff up. And we'll put some taxes in there. So now you see that it calculates everything, and there's $0 that's the allowable expense for CACFP. That's because they don't do any CACFP jobs. So they don't need, or you're not allowed to pay for any of their salary with those funds. But when we click add, you'll see it's added them here, and you got the grand total here. So this amount keeps going up, but this amount only goes up by depending on the portions that are allowed for CACFP. So the grand total, that $150,000 for those teachers, is included here because it is part of your institution budget, but it's not over here because you're not going to use CACFP funds to pay for it. So you would want to do that for all of your employees. Need to go here, except for the ones that are doing food service labor. And that's where it's going to get kind of tricky, because say some of your teachers do serve meals, and you can count that on food service labor. And I'll show you, and you might be familiar with how to do that because it's kind of similar to how it works when you are doing your expenditure worksheet. So you want to put everyone in your institution that has any type of job, whether or not you use CACFP funds to pay for it, they need to go here. That is not a food service labor job. We'll come to that here in a minute. Benefits. So once you add your employees on there, then you can come and select the individuals here. If you do include those benefits for your employees, and it is an allowable cost. So that's a bad example. We'll put the one I just did. That's at 20%. So you see this 20% carries over. So because you've entered it in and that's an allowable percentage on the salaries, it carries through. This is going to be your allowable amount that will be calculated for these items here. I don't know, I'm making numbers up here. So say that that's the insurance that you supply. You put in the annual cost, you click calculate, it applies the percentage, and that's it. And you add it, and it gets added here. However, if it's those, you can go back. If you saw me do that, you can go back and edit something. This would delete it, that edits it. We're going to add a new item. We can add those 12 teachers and say it's an annual cost of $12,000, which is probably not accurate. But again, I'm making stuff up. But you'll want to put the total amount for all those teachers, calculate, and add it. So it is an administrative cost. However, it's not paid by CACFP. We still need to know what it costs you, but you're not going to use CACFP funds to pay for it. So here's an example of that. I have these two entered here, and it puts in your grand total of what it costs you, but then here's the allowable amount. Then you come to your administrative expenses. A lot of these you might not even have thought about entering on your budget, and that's fine. But I encourage you to, it's a projection. So if you have expenses that for your business that fall into any of these schedules, it is an allowable cost within reason. So I'll briefly explain all these different schedules here. This first one is for equipment that costs $2,500 and more. So generally, it's kind of hard to plan for those type of purchases. Generally, like your refrigerator goes out or something like that, you just got to run out and buy one. And that's understandable, but you still need to get it in your budget. So anything that's $2,500 and more, it's got to be in this line item. And you've got to come back in if it's something like an emergency that happens like that. You got to come back in and put it in there. But keep in mind, you still got to follow your procurement methods too. So $2,500 wouldn't require our approval. It just needs to be in your budget if you want to use CACFP funds to pay for it. And are just a lot like what you saw in those previous forms. You have materials, supplies, items that are durable. So that's basically anything that's under $200 or $2,500, but it's not like a throwaway item. So desks, chairs, computers, anything that's less than $2,500, and it's durable supplies that can be here. And so again, it has to be a reasonable amount you allocate to CACFP. So you can use our funds to buy a desk or some furniture, because it can only be a reasonable percent. So keep that in mind. If it's a computer or things like that, you can use our funds to pay for it, but it can't pay for all of it because you're using those items for other things in your business, not just for CACFP. Now, if it was something you could reasonably prove that it was solely for CACFP, we could allow it. But generally, those items aren't going to be. This schedule here is not where you're going to put stuff like pots and pans and any kind of kitchenware, because that still goes down in part B. This is just administrative type of supplies that are durable, that are intended to last more than a year or so. Then you have material supplies, items that are expendable. And these are talking about your office supplies. those type of things. So you can use our funds to pay for those things. Again, it's got to be, a reasonable percentage of it that's allocated to CACFP. But if you want to use our funds to pay for any of these things, it has to first be in your budget. Because if we come out and do an administrative review and we see you using our funds to pay for office supplies, yet we come here and look and you don't have anything on the schedule, we can't allow it as an allowable cost. So go ahead and project that you will have those costs. And it is kind of tricky how you put it in there because you really don't know if you're projecting how many items and how many quantity. You're really just after a grand total. And so that's what I did this one for an example. Office supplies one time, we'll say it's $350 and say 50% of it, your office supplies, 50% you use for CACFP stuff because you guys do. You print a lot of forms for us. That's a lot of paper, that's a lot of ink, but you might also be printing a lot of stuff for DHS too. So I think 50% would be a reasonable amount for these types of items. And then when you look at it, it'll calculate it and it's going to allow your allowable amount for CACFP as 175. You can add as many things on here and make it as detailed as you want. Printing and postage, that might not be something you all have a lot of CACFP costs, but it is allowable, but they're entered the same way here. The item, the quantity, what it costs, the allowable amount. If you're printing something that's just for CACFP, say you go and have your income applications printed somewhere, that would be an allowable cost. Say you got 400 of them printed and it costs you $100. Oh no, don't put 400, just put one. If I put 400, it will multiply it, sorry. So this would be an example of 100% allowable cost. We're gonna say income applications or FSIA even. You went and made one purchase, even though it might have been 400. I misspoke there. See how you don't want to do that. You just went and printed, you plan to print one time and it's going to cost about $100. And that would be 100% allowable cost. Add it here. Postage, I'm not sure. This is more for sponsors. Unless you're mailing stuff to us, I mean, that would be an allowable cost, which would also kind of be a hard thing to judge. I don't even know what a stamp is anymore, but we'll just say 50 cents. And we'll say it's 50%. I don't know. I'm just making numbers up here just to show you how it works. And it does talk about your postage machine. If you do, mail anything out in the post that's CACFP related, it is an allowable cost, but your postage machine could potentially go in a different area. You might lease it or something like that, or you might have purchased it. I don't know. Most of you probably don't have postage machines, though. Office space rental and lease. This is something that we never, it's an allowable cost, but we got to make sure we haven't really been getting quite enough information on it. So we got to make sure we've got your office space agreement information in here. It's not going to be anything where we're going to require you, if you have a regular, just like a lease with an unrelated party, you won't have to submit a copy of that lease agreement. Now, it will probably be something that we look at a little closer in the future on reviews. But 99% of you guys are going to have an office space that you lease between unrelated parties. More of you will have that. So that's the one I'm going to go over. When you open it up, you'll see you have these selections. This one's for unrelated parties. This is for related parties, which gets a little trickier. But like I said, most of our institutions, if you have a lease, you've got it with an unrelated party. If you own your facility, you can't pay yourself rent. You cannot write off part of that expense as for rent. If you're not paying rent or a mortgage, it's not an allowable cost. So we're going to go through this office space agreement between unrelated parties. I'm going to type in this information. I'm just making it up. And we want the lease date. It just depends on, it would be on your lease agreement what those dates are. I'm just making stuff up. We'll say this one lasts for 3 years, right? C to indicate if it includes any of these things. And then down here is how it determines the allowable amount, and it goes by square footage. So you first want to figure out, you've got to figure out the total institution square footage, which you probably should know. So we'll say it's 3,000 square feet. But then what's the portion of it that's used for CACFP? So that would be your entire kitchen. If you have a cafeteria area, it could be that entire area, or if not, it could just be a small portion of all your classrooms where you serve. And it could be a portion of all your shared common areas, like an office, things like that. So, measure that out and get a reasonable amount. And we're going to put it, that's probably not, we'll say 1,000. And that's all you enter here. CACFP square footage, that's the amount of square footage that you use for your CACFP, and then the total square footage of the entire building. And then you're going to put in your total annual office rental or lease amount. That's all you enter here, and then you press calculate. It's going to do the math for you and tell you exactly the amount of the percentage that's an allowable amount that CACFP funds can pay for. And then it's going to calculate the amount that's the allowable cost down to the penny. So the amount that's calculated here is the amount of money that you can write off on your expenditure worksheet and count off towards CACFP, for a total year. So basically, this would be your annual amount. You divide that by 12, and that would be the amount that you could put on your expenditure worksheet that you're allocating to CACFP. Then you have your utilities. I've already got one entered here. I'm going to click on the edit. As a rule of thumb, you got to put in those allowable percentages too. And a good percentage to use would be whatever percentage is determined here. So based on the square footage that I use, it's basically 33%. So carry that through with your utilities. If you don't have a good way to know the percentage, that is an allowable methodology. It's a real calculation that you've come up with. That's a reasonable amount of that you can justify why you're using that percentage allocated to CACFP. So I will change that here, and it doesn't let decimals. So we're just going to put 33%. So we got OG&E, this is our total annual cost, and 33% allocated to CACFP. Same thing for, we'll just say water. And it's 33%. Calculate, add. ONG. Again, I'm making up numbers. Calculate, add. And as you guys are in here, you're seeing this approved amount. You probably don't see that when you're filling it out because that's only STE. We come back and approve your amounts there, so don't worry about that. You see here's the total annual cost, the percentage that can be allocated to CACFP, and it calculates your total allowable amount. Those are all reasonable amounts, so we would come back and we'd approve that. Like I said, keep in mind, it might be approved and in your budget, but it doesn't mean you'll necessarily have the funds left over after each month to spend it on those things. It all depends on how you're budgeting and spending your money. After you go out and you purchase your food and food-related and milk and food-related items for the meal service, whatever money you have left over, these are the things you can use it to spend on. These would be allowable costs. But if it's not here, you can't. Insurance premiums, this might not be one you've ever added or thought of, but you might have vehicle insurance. Well, you use the vehicle to go and buy groceries. it would be an allowable cost. It'd be a pretty small percentage, depending on if you can validate the number of miles you drive on that vehicle. I mean, we wouldn't ask for it up front, but when we do an administrative review, we might look at that. We might ask for a mileage log to see if the percentage you're using for mileage, and mileage is further on down the list, but you can use that same percentage to determine how much percentage of your insurance premium on your vehicle you could use. Other instances of insurance premiums would be like your liability insurance or workers' comp, things like that. So it does have to be a reasonable amount. And if you're ever in question of what the allowable percentage would be, I would default back to that amount that your office space rental calculated. Or if it's insurance related to a specific person, you could default back to the calculation that the salaries, that salary schedule calculated. Or if you just ever need help, reach out to us and we can help you. Contracted professional services. So this would be like, we'd be looking for like accounting services. If you contract with any special consulting agency that helps with your paperwork, things like that, we do have those types of institutions. We'd need to know what type of service, what's the annual cost, and the percent allocated to CACFP. So like, if it was a contracting business or a company that helps with just CACFP, keep in mind you still have to procure it properly. But once you've done that and you've initiated that service, something like that would be 100% allocable to CACFP. But things like accounting or extermination, computer programming, you'd have to have a reasonable percentage allocated to CACFP. It can't be all of it because you have another business you use those things for. Equipment rental and lease. Some of you might not have anything that applies here, but examples of this would be like a copy machine. I don't know. That's really the only thing I can think of. This would be a place where you could put your postage meter. It's really if it's over that $2,500 or more per unit. You would need to list it here. We can ask for verification that, ask for that lease or rental agreement just to verify it is a reasonable cost. But really, like a copy machine, a printer would be the only thing that comes to mind that might be allowable for CACFP, because we know you guys make tons of copies. Family size income applications, enrollment forms, which that's the same thing now. But many of you might not have that. Communications is where you're going to add like your internet service and your telephone. Those are both allowable costs and to use CACFP funds for. Wouldn't be allowable to use all of it, but you guys are on, you have to be online to be able to do our application. So if you can justify the amount you're allocating to CACFP, then we will approve it. Advertising public information. Most of you probably aren't paying for any type of advertising that has to do with CACFP. Now, you guys have to do the public release. When you're brand new, you have to do a real public release, but you're not required to pay for it. And then every year you renew, you can opt into the statewide one that we do. But you don't have to do that. But if you do do any type of advertising that has to do about CACFP, if it's solely about CACFP, it would be 100% applicable to CACFP. But say you just do some flyers or some publicity about your program or your center, and you happen to mention, oh, and we operate on the CACFP. I see that a lot on advertisements. You use that as an incentive. So that would be a reason that you could use part of our funds to pay for that type of advertising, but it would only be a small percentage because you're also advertising for your business. The only time it could be 100% applicable to CACFP is if just a public release announcing only about CACFP. Dues, membership, subscriptions. Examples of this would be, you might have all kinds of dues and memberships and subscriptions. The ones that would have allocable amounts to CACFP, if you're part of the CACFP Association, or there's lots of licensing, childcare licensing groups in Oklahoma, not lots, there's a couple. You could pay for a portion of those with CACFP funds because y'all might probably do nutrition related things, but that wouldn't be 100% allocable. We couldn't pay for all of it, but we could pay for a portion. But if you say you use Minute Menu or Kid Care, that's a program that's solely for the food program, that would be 100% allocable to CACFP. But say you have a subscription to ProCare, that would not be 100% because ProCare has so many other things that you use for your accounting and whatnot, but there is a menu and other things that are related to the CACFP in ProCare. So a portion of that could be allocated to CACFP. And then your mileage here, it's like I was rambling on earlier. 99% of the time, your purpose of travel is going to be for groceries that would be allocable to CACFP. Our sponsors who have multiple sites generally are going to have some other travel costs that you all wouldn't when you're just a single-sided, because they have to go and monitor their different sites. So they might have to travel across the state and incur other charges. For you guys, for single-sided, it's just going to be, the name of the person that's driving, doing most of the driving, and that's being reimbursed for mileage. Or if you don't reimburse them for mileage, you can just put the owner's name, because say you have a van and you have your cook that goes and buys the groceries. Well, you pay for the gas, and you're not paying that person for their mileage. So you would just put your name, and the travel purpose would be groceries, and then you would put the total cost. Now, you'd want to put the total cost of mileage, annual miles a year, but you can't allocate all your miles a year because you're also probably transporting kids to and from school and things like that. So again, it has to be a reasonable amount, and I would highly suggest you are maintaining mileage logs to support that number of miles and the percentages you're allocating here. So that's all of your administrative costs. Remember, everything I just talked about, those are only costs that have to do with the business side of operating CACFP, the administrative side. And like I said, we want to know what it costs your entire institution, and then those percentages are to tell us, okay, this is the amount of money we're saying we want to use CACFP funds to pay for it in the event we have money to use to pay for them. And then we come back and approve it, if it's an allowable amount. Part B is where we get down to your operational expenses, and that's the expenses related directly to the meal service. So 1 and 2, pretty simple. You're still just plugging in the numbers. We come back afterwards and put in the CMP approved amount. So it's a projection. Look back at what you spent last fiscal year and, inflate it by 10 or 15%. Same thing for your food related supplies. Your food service and labor, these schedules are going to work a lot like these did up here. So you'll want to open it up and add these people here. So we'll just say I use Edgar a lot. He is a teacher, so we'll make him be the cook. And we say, same thing here, we're going to base it off 2,080 hours a year. So we're going to say he spends half his time preparing and cooking and half his time cleaning up. And we're going to say he makes $25,000 a year. Same thing. We're putting in the hours, the amount of salary, the amount of taxes, calculate. And because this is a food service person, all of their salary can, if they spend all of their time doing CACFP jobs, all of the cook's salary could be paid for with CACFP funds. That is allowable. There is this that we've had added because sometimes we have institutions like tribes or schools that, like I stated before, we need to know what it costs. So say Edgar's the cook and you're some type of institution. A lot of our nonprofits sometimes you use all of our money to pay for food and milk, and that's it. You never intend to use our funds to pay for anything more than that. If that were the case for Edgar here, we'd say the salary for this employee is not paid with CACFP funds and just add it. The reason we ask you to do that is because we still need to know what it costs to pay Edgar to cook, but we don't need to include it in the CACFP budget because it's part of your budget. I'm going to delete Bob. Bob didn't delete. There we go. Although Edgar is a cost, he's not a CACFP cost. So see how that's still 0? And that's all because I checked that box. Many of you, this might not apply. You're a center and you pay them with our funds when you can. Don't check it. So you'll see now Edgar still makes 20,000, or he's at 20,000, 29,000 is his annual cost, and you'll see it's listed here now. If you do have teachers that they only spend a portion of their time doing CACFP duties, this is where this one's a little different. You know, you wanted to list them up above in the salaries for administrative because they spend the vast majority of their time doing administrative duties. But this would be where you would put them to allocate their number of hours where you can use CACFP funds to pay for it. So you might have various teachers, and it's the same way. You'd add up all their hours, and then you'd add up all their wages, and you'd enter them here. And so a lot of your teachers, we allow 2 hours a day to go towards their their CACFP because they're serving meals a lot of times. They're sitting down and having meals. So 2 hours a day times 5 days a week. That's 10 hours a week. And then we had 12 teachers up there, if you remember. So 10 times 12, that's 120 hours a week. I hope I'm making sense. And then you multiply that times 52. So I'm just trying to figure out how many hours a week we can use for our teachers. So basically, we'll just keep it at 10 hours a week times 52, 520. That's the amount of hours each of those. So we're putting in it for 12 various, and I think I'm going to keep it for 12 teachers because that's how we lay it up there. So we've got the 12 teachers, and those 12 teachers that each spend 520 hours in a year doing CACFP stuff because that equates to 2 hours a day. Okay, and how I came to that was 2 hours a day times 5 days a week times 52 weeks in a year comes to that. Okay. Then we're going to enter the salaries for all those teachers. And I'm just giving you guys examples. Remember, these numbers are made up, and how you might operate and allocate things in your institution might be different. Just remember the point of what we're trying to enter on these forms. On the top one above, in the salaries in Part A, we want to know the salaries where they're doing jobs that have nothing to do with CACFP. And then if they have CACFP duties, you might have both if it's administrative related. This one down here is where we're entering salaries that are just people that are doing stuff that has to do with the planning, preparation, service, and cleanup of a meal. And we're just allowing you that you can add them all together. If you don't have that many teachers, I'd highly suggest you put them in separately because it's easier that way, especially when you got to come back and update stuff. But anyway, you'll see now that it's added those 12 teachers, and those 12 teachers at 10 hours a week, which is 2 hours a day, and then Edgar, who's your cook. But like I said, if you come back and say, okay, well, they really do spend those hours a day, but we're not really going to use money to do that. Use CACFP funds to pay for it. Now it's just got the $29,000. I hope that makes sense. And then this one works just the same way as I showed you before. You put in the total amount. You're going to carry across oh wait, on these ones it's all allowed because they're food service related. But anyway, say Edgar, we'll say 1,000. Makes you put stuff in some boxes. There you have it. Part C has not changed in any way at all. This is where you're going to insert your total income. And like I said, it's projected. So it wants to be kind of reflective of what you made in the year past, but also maybe increased, hopefully, in the year going forward. Don't shortchange yourself, because this form makes you have to be, you can't be in a loss. So if you're in a loss, it's not going to let you save. So you want to report as much income as you can here, okay? You don't want to make it up, but you want to make sure you're reporting as much your private pay, then you put your Title 20 here if you have any other federal funding, and then you enter your projected CACFP amount. And that's it. It's down here, Part D, it calculates what your profit loss is going to be. And like I said, we're in a profit right now because we have ridiculous amounts up here. But make sure that you know, you're entering as much as you can in, because what this budget is doing is making sure you're financially viable, right? So it's kind of a catch-22, and it kind of contradicts what we say. You can't make a profit. You can't make a profit off CACFP, but you have to be a viable institution and show you have enough funding. And that's what we're after here. We want to see, what does it cost you to operate, both with your admin and operating costs here? How much revenue do you have coming in? And are you a viable institution? I hope this has helped more than it's confused you. If you are needing more help than this, please, by all means, tune into one of our trainings on the first and third Tuesday of each month. The last thing I want to show you that we've changed on this form here, we've added this date of original application submission. So before you submit the application, it will require you to put the current day's date and then submit. And that's it. That's all I've got for you guys. I hope this was helpful. Please reach out to us if you have any questions.